You've seen us grow vegetables in our raised beds for several years now, but have you ever thought about trying to grow fruit trees in a raised bed? Well, it will work, but the thing that you want to do is try to find dwarf varieties. But have you ever thought about what causes a fruit tree to be dwarf? Well, there's some things that you need to know about that, and you're going to have to ask some questions. Now, the tree that we have here is a nectarine, and it is a grafted tree, but it's really not considered a dwarf tree. And the way that you tell if a tree is dwarfed or not, again, is by asking questions to the nursery to find out what it's been grafted onto. There are several ways that the trees are dwarfed. The first way is by the rootstock, and again, this tree has been budded or grafted right at this point onto this rootstock. And this is the rootstock, and then of course this is a part of the tree that we want, the variety that we want. Now there's several different types of rootstocks that can cause a tree to be dwarfed. Now in a nectarine or peach, we can usually control the size by just heavy pruning, and they'll respond to that pretty well. But on an apple tree, let me give you some examples of some of the rootstocks that you can purchase. Usually they're sold on either Malling or Malling Merton, and those are usually abbreviated by M or double M. Now the number that's following the M or double M really doesn't have any clue as to what size or height that's going to be. But just as an example, Malling 27, the rootstock, and that's the name given again for a particular rootstock, will dwarf the tree to about a size of 5 to 7 feet. Then you'll see the numbers like Malling 9, 26, Malling 7A, and you see as they increase in height there to the least dwarfing variety, which is a Malling Merton 111, and it's going to be dwarfed at about 20 to 24 feet. Now for most of us, that doesn't sound like a very dwarf tree, but it does have some semi-dwarfing characteristics, and it may be sold, again, as a dwarf or a semi-dwarf tree. Now a standard apple tree is going to get about 25 feet high anyway. So now you know why you need to ask your garden center, what is it grafted onto? Is it on a Malling Merton 111 that's still going to get 20 to 24 feet, or one maybe 5 to 7 feet? And a lot of times it won't tell you that on the tag, it just tells you dwarf or semi-dwarf. So be sure and ask questions. Now there's another way that these trees can be dwarfed as well. In addition to the rootstock, which we mentioned earlier on, there may be an inner stem piece that's grafted in between the rootstock and the top of the tree that you want. Again, it would be just a little piece that's grafted in between there called an inner stem. And those inner stems mixed with the rootstock will cause the dwarfing pattern. And usually an inner stem and a rootstock will make the trees a little bit shorter. Again, there can be more than 10 variations. Some examples again are like a Malling 27 with a Malling Merton 106, you're going to get a tree dwarfed to about 7 to 9 feet, and so on and so forth, up to a combination of an inner stem of a Malling 111 and a Malling 9, which will get you up to about 12 to 14 feet. So you can see an inner stem combination with a rootstock will get you a smaller tree. Now there's also spur type trees that you'll find, such as apples and pears, and sometimes some of your plums and cherries. And the spur, again, remember, is just a little growth that comes off of the main branches, so you'll still get some height on it, but the trees usually aren't as bushy as they normally would be. And so there'll be some spur type trees that will dwarf, and those can range anywhere from 10 to 20 feet. And for the smallest trees, you'll get the double dwarf, and those are usually a spur type that's grafted on with a rootstock that's dwarfed too. So there's several variations of getting trees to be dwarf or semi-dwarf. Now remember, a standard size tree is going to be the biggest growing tree, and they're usually still grafted but onto seedling rootstock, which makes them a little bit more aggressive. So the Malling and the Malling Merton are the most common rootstocks recommended. There's many, many more varieties out there. But most importantly, you want to ask questions again and find out just what's going on and how small that dwarf tree is going to be, because you can see there's a great range of difference in size of heights. Now for those of you who may not want to plant a dwarf tree in a raised bed like this, there's also some other ways you can get the same type of improvements and help those trees out. And let me take you over to our orchard and show you what I'm talking about. Last year we lost a plum and an apricot tree here in our orchard, really just for the sheer nature of poor soil conditions. We've got a problem with heavy clay soil to start with here in Stillwater, not to mention the fact that we've got a lot of fescue planted in among our trees, and of course that requires an awful lot of watering during the summer, so we kept the trees a little bit too wet over the past years. And then the next problem is just coming in with our lawnmower. Mowing that often, we've gotten some heavy compaction. So we pull the trees up, and we're trying a raised bed concept that you'll see here, and we'll explain that a little bit to you. But first of all, I want to tell you that the raised bed concept is really catching on in a lot of the research projects too. Here at the OSU Research Fruit Station in Perkins, a lot of their new tree plantings that they're putting in actually are using raised beds. Some of them they're building up the beds now and sterilizing the soil, and others I've already planted some of the new trees and tried that method. Now of course we don't have the equipment or the amount of space that they do to try that, but we've adapted that here in our fruit orchard, and it's something that I think you can do successfully too, but it's going to take a little bit of effort. Now what we've done is we're going to eventually tie all of this row of trees together. The trees on the ends also are showing a little bit of symptoms from poor compaction and also poor soil conditions. They're getting cankers, we're losing a few branches. So eventually we'll raise this whole bed up about 6 to 8 inches, and we've hauled in some sandy loam soil and we've mixed it here with some of our silage topping. And so we put organic matter in it ahead of time where we raise the bed up and tilled it in. Now that's the best way to incorporate organic matter, and again we've just mounded it up and we've tried to get a little bit higher to allow for some compaction. But the first thing that we'll do is, remember on your fruit trees when they come in this time of year, most of them are going to be bare root. This again is a nectarine, and we've got it soaking in water while we're getting our planting hole ready, and that's real important if you get a bare root tree. Sometimes they'll be planted in containers with sawdust or soil or peat moss around them, and if that's the case, you can still knock all that off, soak it in water. Now, you've heard us talk about planting the same depth that it was grown before, and if you'll look at the line, it's not right here because that's where we've had the plant in water. It's up here a little bit higher, and you don't want to cover up the grafted portion, but we're not going to put it as deep or even at the same level. We may raise it just a little bit. We've got our planting hole that's a lot bigger. It's not deep, so we don't want to get it too deep because we're defeating the purpose if we set it down in that heavy clay. So we're setting it at least the same level, maybe a little bit higher in this condition, and we're not putting any fertilizer or any other organic matter other than what was already mixed in. And then just go ahead and work your soil in around it. Again, you can see how loose it is and it's sandy, and that's really the kind of soils you need for your fruit trees. Is just good, loose, sandy soil. Now again, be careful not to cover the graft, and we're going to have a little bit more to fill in here to get it to our mounded level. But I think you're getting the general idea of that. So we'll work that in, and the next step to do on this is make sure it's packed down pretty good. But this is a nectarine again, so remember we can control its growth habit by pruning it into an open center like we showed you this past week. Now the thing that you want to do is try to find an area where you're going to get some scaffold branches about knee high, and that's really right in that area, and we've got some good ones coming out. But at the same time, we'll go ahead and top it to increase those sizes, but we're going to leave a little bit of the stem in. Kat Taylor, who you've seen on the show, is telling us that if you'll leave a little bit of the center in and not cut it to that point initially, that the growth in that area will help spread these branches out a little bit. So we're going to try that this year on this particular tree. So we're going to cut, and I know this is the hardest step for most of you, you're cutting 50% of your tree off right off the bat, and then we'll try to touch it up a little bit. Remember, we're selecting a bud to grow out. We've got one over here the same way. So that's what we're going to do this year with our tree. We'll get a lot of new growth in here, and then eventually once we get our scaffold branches, we'll come and cut it back a little bit closer. So pruning, starting right off the bat to train the tree in the direction you want it, is very crucial, and it's the hardest step for many of the gardeners to do. Well, the next thing that we're going to do is water the tree in. And again, we're not going to fertilize or anything, we're just going to put mulch on it. But I can't emphasize enough, if you're selecting dwarf trees, make sure you know the varieties and the rootstocks, and most importantly, plant in the proper soil conditions.